Welcome to the Dealing with Goliath podcast. Now, we're not going to do our usual intro because this isn't quite our usual episode. This is episode 100. I want to do something a little bit different. So, the theme of this episode is about AI and the psychological edge. So, for many of you who know me, maybe you have my book already. It's called Goliath, similar to the podcast name, Dealing with Goliath, psychological edge in gaining the psychological edge in negotiation. And I think there's a huge paradigm shift happening at the moment. Some people are well aware of it, some people think it's overblown. And this is something with AI changing everything. And this is something that I want to discuss with my good friend, an AI expert, coach and trainer, Mr. Alastair McDermott. So, Alastair, welcome back on the show. Great to have you here.
Great to be here, and congratulations on 100 episodes.
Yeah, you got there well before me. I started before you. You were far more disciplined about your output. But here we are. Yeah. So, look, as you know, I'm big into this idea of the psychological edge. But there's a huge amount of disruption already happening. We're starting to see it in hundreds of different ways, not least a huge amount of, companies, software companies, legal companies, financial companies, suddenly quite significantly reducing an awful lot of their new hires. This is predominantly in the States yet. It doesn't seem to have caught on in Ireland as much, a little bit less in the UK on the initial stats so far. But this is something for a lot of industries that's coming down the pipeline. That question of why should I hire you when I can just ask ChatGPT? So let's dive in there. Let's talk about that. So, if you don't mind, we can start on that one. I saw in one of your blog posts you said, and it's a nice quote, if you work like a robot, AI will replace you. Can you talk us around that as to how people should be thinking about how they need to pivot or adjust their work or their work practices?
Yeah, so this goes back to scientific management, which was created by a guy called Taylor in, I think, the 1870s or so.
I remember
And
when I was 16, BizOrg class, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
Taylor and the scientific method. Yeah, exactly.
exactly, yeah. It was management by stopwatch. They literally timed people doing all these things, and it worked really well for Henry Ford, who created
Mm,
the first moving production line. Where the components they were building moved rather than the people.
right.
Um, and all of this, like McDonald's has this down to a fine art as well, where they've got SOPs for everything, standard operating procedures, and you do everything exactly the same everywhere, and everything is in the same place, the same labels, and so you've got these kind of repeatable, simple tasks where we ask people to follow the exact script, and people don't really work great like that. That's not what we like to do. But actually, AI is really good at that. AI is
Right.
really good at following the exact script and doing this small, repeatable task really well. So it's kind of ironic. We've actually now built a system which will now make those people who are doing that kind of work obsolete. Now, it's going to not hit McDonald's first. It's going to hit knowledge workers who are doing the virtual knowledge equivalent of that. If you're taking a piece of information and copying it from one spreadsheet to another and then sending an email, and that's all you're doing every day, that kind of simple, basic robotic admin work is perfect for AI to replace. So that's what I mean by if you work like a robot, AI will replace you. The more simple and kind of granular those tasks are, the more likely it is. The more creative and the more complex, the less likely it is that AI will come along and replace you, at least not immediately. It may be able to at some point in the future. Will probably almost certainly at some point in the future, but we don't know what that timeline looks like. Some people are very aggressive with their predictions, and some people are saying it'll never happen. And I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I think we don't really know yet.
Okay, very interesting. And it's very interesting you're talking about that. As you said, we in so many industries, we literally successfully made humans act like robots.
Hmm.
Which, of course, this is one of these fallacies that, particularly the current, we're not going to get too political, but the current American administration, like them or loathe them, are trying to bring jobs back to America. And what pointed out subtly and not enough is that if that factory comes back from Vietnam or China or Mexico, it doesn't employ 5,000 people like it did when it left in 1978 or 1984. It employs about 50 because
Hmm.
most of the work is done by high-tech robots now. You see the robot arms doing all the stuff that humans did sort of 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the example in that manufacturing way. But as we know, it's not so much the blue collar worker that's in danger of being wiped out by AI anymore. It's because they've had that. They've actually gone over that hump in many ways. It's, as you say, the white collar worker. And this is what we're talking about, that an awful lot of industries aren't needing those people to do what you might call the grunt work or those repeatable, more simple tasks, because software, whether it's AI or just more advanced software, can do it. Um, so talk to me about this because just on a different tack on the same sort of area, you were asked in a recent interview, which I found fascinating. You were asked by the interviewer, would you still hire a human VA, a virtual assistant? And you emphatically immediately answered yes. So can you explain why that is? Because you're Mr. AI. So I'm
Hmm.
thinking you're going to say, no, I have agents and I'm creating all these agent experiments. And I know they're not foolproof yet, but they've, again, like everything in AI, it comes on in leaps and bounds every couple of months. So
Hmm.
I was interested why you emphatically said, yes, you still want a human, which is
Okay.
Aiko. Hello to
So,
Aiko, by the way. Aiko's
yeah,
great.
and
Um,
Aiko is a real person, and it's kind of ironic because her name starts with AI.
yeah. Perfect.
Um, but yeah, so I spent a lot of time looking for somebody who had a name with AI in it. No, I didn't. I was working with Aiko long before we did AI. Okay, so let me go back one level and just explain what I'm talking about, just so that people understand the context here.
Hmm.
So we have AI tools that can do one task, and they're really good at doing one task. And then above that, we have these kind of what we call agentic systems. And that's where they can do more than one task at a time before they come back to you. So it can go and read a website and then make a decision to read another website and then come back and write a report and then give you the report. So it's done three different things there. It's not
Hmm.
just done one. And so at the higher level, the manager AI, we call it an orchestrator. And so an AI orchestrator is really good at managing all of these subtasks. And that's what's really interesting about where AI is going is when we can have these agentic systems where they can work in a way that doesn't need continuous human intervention. So what I
And
mean by that is we
just
can
to
give it a
pause that,
task. Go
so
ahead.
this, because I remember, and just to give a super practical example of this, and tell me if this is what it is. This is where someone can set their own assistant AI, book me a hair appointment.
Hmm.
But you know my calendar and when I like to do that. So
Yeah.
it'll ring their favorite salon and try and book the appointment. And if it's not available, we'll go to another one and then to another one until they get a time slot that works for the individual. The
Hmm.
point is, it's actually still it's going out on a loop, getting feedback. If it's no, then it tries a different place. If it's yes, then it's booked into the calendar, right?
Hmm.
I mean, Google used this as an example a few years, like a year or two ago, right? Where
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
AI was
Absolutely.
talking to another
Yeah,
AI.
it was completely, yeah. And they were talking in voice as well. Like what, it wasn't kind of machine language or anything. They were just having an English language conversation. Yeah. So
Amazing.
so the we have these orchestrators,
Mm,
which are, and that's the technical term that people have used. Don't know why they chose to use that, but I think of like a conductor in an orchestra, where you're telling everybody else what they're doing and when they're doing it. So we have these orchestrators, these AI orchestrators,
mm,
and they're pretty good. They can do a lot of stuff. The problem is there are certain things that human orchestrators, and a human orchestrator is just a human doing a job in the same way. So when we're making decisions and we're like somebody who's self-employed, you have to make a decision as to what you're going to do. And then you have to put on the working hat and go and do it. And then you
right.
take off the working hat and you decide, okay, now what do I do next? And so human like we're orchestrating ourselves there, and some of us do it better than others.
Yeah.
Um, But when you have a human orchestrator, which is what Aiko is, like she's my assistant, but she's a human orchestrator. So she's able to figure out when I give her a task, she's able to read intent and implicit instructions that are not that I didn't explicitly give her. Whereas an AI orchestrator will execute the command literally. And that's the problem is it doesn't know how to infer. And I think that they will get better at this over time. And again, it's this balance, this trade-off of when we're using AI of privacy versus functionality. The less privacy that we have personally, the more functional the AI will be because we've given it more context that it
Right.
can make decisions in. But it'll make decisions based on data, whereas a human orchestrator can navigate these kind of unwritten rules and unwritten context and infer things. And
That's yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, and a human will also do relationships better.
Hmm.
It'll understand context of relationships, and it can also, a human orchestrator can also solve problems creatively. And this is something where an AI orchestrator typically will be quite brittle. So if we go to the idea of brittle or fragile and robust or creative problem solving, that's where AI falls down currently, and the humans will be much better.
And this is kind
And
of yeah, go
yeah,
ahead. Yeah.
and then
Well,
another thing is this kind of judgment. A human can make a judgment call, and AI just can't do that, or at least not yet.
so there's a few interesting things there. One is that, as you said, there's the inferences, there's knowing someone. So when they say this, you kind of have that extra context from knowing that person that maybe is somewhat unspoken, but is an impression gained over some time. As I said, the creative problem solving. It's just very interesting putting it back into negotiation or high impact conversations, building rapport with clients, with suppliers, with our own staff, that these things are right there. And for me, one of those great, as you said, the psychological edge, when you look at my book, my program, my whole stuff that I'm all about that, is like clarifying one's own values, being able to connect, being able to open up to the other side, being able to have them feel like they can open up to you. So you have that greater context for their creative problem solving ability, but it's that adaptability that's absolutely key. So it's really interesting that you're saying that in many ways that's where AI still falls down, and by the sounds of it, will for quite some time.
I think
Uh,
so. Like I don't see that part happening very quickly. Like AI is advancing quickly in an awful lot of capabilities,
yeah,
and I think it's incredibly useful. But I don't see it fully replacing people in certain roles. I do see it replacing people who are in robotic roles and who are in very basic admin grunt work type roles where they're not really adding a whole lot of value except moving bits around. And
it's
if you're in that kind of role, then you are in trouble. And like there's a lot of people who are quite happy to do that kind of work and who like doing work that is kind of not that taxing because maybe they've got a very active life outside of work, so they don't want to have these jobs where it's particularly taxing. But I think the problem is AI is going to come along and take away a lot of that. And this is one reason why people say that AI may disproportionately impact on women because a lot more women are in admin jobs for various reasons
well, that's interesting.
historically. So,
Okay,
like, there's all sorts of different factors going on there. Another issue is where are our senior people going to come from later on?
all right.
Because if we're replacing junior people with AI, because AI will do the research or do the grunt work, then we won't have kind of junior people coming up through the ranks. And so, where do the next senior people come from when the current senior people retire?
This is the thing. I mean, we talked about this. I'm actually trying to, at the moment, get together an experiment to, in my opinion, AI is that causing that problem can also solve that problem to a certain
Hmm.
extent, in that if it can do the tasks that the human can do faster, better, cheaper, then it can train someone to do those tasks to an expert level. faster and through examples. And we kind of talked about this in a slightly different way that I've actually been using it to learn a whole new field myself attached to negotiation. So at the moment, for the last few months, I've been learning all about what they call micro mergers and acquisitions, M&A work. So companies 500,000 to 5 million, that sort of territory. And I got a GPT. I had several courses on it with vast amounts of information, but I was just lost in it. And I was like, I'm not using this at all. This is terrible. Why am I not learning this stuff? It's because it maybe didn't quite know how to work through it and all of that sort of stuff. Instead, having talked to another guest actually on the show a few weeks back, Scott Shigori, he was talking about using AI and how some initial reports say it is making people that little bit less creative, less intelligent potentially, whereas other uses of it actually improve your learning, your thinking, your creative problem solving, and all sorts of other facets. And the difference being how you use it. So it came from how Oxford University advised their students to use it, to use AI, and it's to use it as a tutor, have it challenge you, have it point out, tell me what you understand about blah, and then you sort of basically tell it, and then it asks you questions and points out where you're incorrect or where you're missing subtleties or major factors. So this is kind of how I built GPT, with your help, which loaded up with all of my favorite experts on this stuff, and then basically have it give me case studies. I tell it how I'd approach this sort of deal, how I do this, the before the deal, the first 90 days, and so on. And it tells me, you did this really well. And you're like, yeah, stop giving me praise. But then it says, you missed this or you underplayed that. This is a huge red flag that you missed. This is often shows this as a problem. So learning through basically being in the sandbox, playing with this thing, you're doing it. It's not for real, but you are effectively doing the thing and it giving you live, personalized, individualized feedback. Hugely powerful. Great fun too, by the way. But
Yeah, no, like what you're doing
amazing
there
the
is
the learning curve,
super.
you know?
Yeah, and sorry, I cut you off there. You
Not
just
at
say like
all.
it increases the learning curve massively, and so I think so. I see four pillars of opportunity for AI, and maybe
Okay.
there are more, but these are the four that I see. I've written about this in a free white paper on my website. It's at humanspark.ai/toolkit, and you can download that without any email address or anything. But the four pillars that I see are productivity. So this is kind of table stakes. Everybody
Mm,
talks about productivity, and like we are seeing huge productivity increases. So there've been a lot of different studies in different industries, and it varies from industry to industry. But we're seeing around a 30% increase in productivity for knowledge workers, approximately.
it's amazing.
Um,
Yeah.
then, apart from productivity, I like the other ones a bit more because there's a lot more than we can do than just become more productive. We can transform, so we can increase our capabilities. So capabilities is the second one, and that's when that we as a person or as an organization have the capability of doing something that we just couldn't before. So, like for example, there's a lot of people now who are able to build software who could not build software a year ago
What they call the
because
vibe coding, where you just
yeah,
have an
yeah,
idea and you just
and
go and tell it
like
to do stuff.
for example, there are some organizations where they say, okay, we don't want you to come to us with a proposal for a new campaign. We want you to create a mock-up prototype
Hmm.
and bring us that and show us what it'll actually look like. Don't just describe it to us, actually build it and bring it to us. And that moves the conversation forward because then somebody who didn't have that capability now has that capability. For example, I can now create designs, whereas I couldn't design before. I'm like the guy who does the music degree but can't actually play any music. I know a lot about design, but I couldn't actually do it. Whereas now I have the capabilities of doing design because of the tools that are available. So those are the first two, productivity, capabilities. Next one is decision making. So we can
Hmm.
actually do smarter decision making in because we can use AI to process data, vast amounts of data, find patterns, and help us to make better decisions. We can also train AI, and this is a free
Just to
tool I've made.
interject on you there, just
Go
sorry
ahead.
to interrupt you, but on the decision making, it's very interesting because what you can also do is tell it, I'm thinking of doing this, this, and this.
Hmm.
Am I falling into some cognitive bias traps? Am I
Yeah.
into some thinking errors? And it can point out the errors, potential flaws in your thinking. So, sorry, just to double down on that, that it can help you avoid some of those human
Yeah, and
error approaches.
there's loads of different decision making frameworks, which I didn't know about. But there are many, many different decision making frameworks. So I built a tool in AI and free tool in ChatGPT, and it knows about all the different decision making frameworks. So I can say, I need to make a decision. Here's some context. And it says, okay, let's apply this decision making framework because it's the most appropriate for this context. And it's able to help me make a better, smarter decision based on the data that I have as well. And so we're able to make better decisions. We can also now look at, we can get, industry trends. We can look at historical data. We can feed all of this into the machine, and the machine can process it and help us make decisions based on that data. So that's the third one. So we have productivity, capabilities, decision making, and the last one is accelerated learning.
Mm.
And this is what we were just talking about, and it's massive. Like it can really help us to learn things very quickly if we apply it in the way that you're doing, which I think is really good. Where we're going back and forth. Now, I think that education is a field where there's really struggling with AI right now because there's people getting kicked out of college for plagiarism because AI wrote the thing for them. And then there's other people who are uh, seeing huge advances in learning with AI. And it all depends on your approach to it and how you use it. And I think there needs to be more discussion about using it properly and not this kind of rote copy paste, which a lot of people are doing just to get their work done, you know?
In some ways, it's that age-old question of, are you learning or doing this thing for the exam and the accreditation, or are you doing it to know the thing? And when you get that clear, then it's like you're being lazy and copying and pasting and you know nothing about this versus I'm actually learning this to learn I used to be able to debate in German about,
Mhm.
Obdachlosigkeit, like homelessness or mass tourism or all these sort of topics. Then I go to Germany, could barely have a conversation. Right. So in a way, I was kind of had all of the vocabulary that was almost completely useless in the real world. So there's a parallel there about, learning for the exam or studying, cramming for the exam versus being able to do the actual thing. And getting
Yeah.
one's priorities correct on that.
The other thing is, people who are graduating college now are going to need to know how to use AI because
Absolutely.
otherwise they won't get a job because the jobs will now require that you're able to use AI to do something. So it's there's an awful lot. Like if you unpack that whole AI in education thing, there's so much in there to discuss and to think about.
But
But
yeah.
what I would just say as kind of as a high level overview is
Mm,
AI can help people learn more, and it can help our brains to be more creative, and it can help us to raise our IQ or at least maintain it, contrary to what some studies are claiming to show.
yes.
So there's like there's nuance to this. There's gray areas, and it certainly can be highly damaging, and it is being highly damaging in many ways. But there's also ways that it's highly positive.
It's very interesting you talk about that because in many ways, so for example, one of the guests I had on last year, I think it was Dr. Dale Wheelahan, who is one of the main advocates of this movement of the 4-day work week. So it's not the Tim Ferriss 4-hour work week. It's a 4-day work week. And they've run pilot programs in nearly every continent and all sorts of businesses, different industries. They're usually mid-sized businesses. But what's fascinating is they don't just sort of cut a day off, like everybody gets Friday off, hurrah. They they train them in far more efficient methodology. So this is even without talking about AI. There are systems to operate more efficiently that most businesses, like 99 point something percent, aren't using very well. And what the deal is, I think usually they have 6 months as an experiment. And if they're as productive or more with the 4 days than the five, they get to keep the 4 days. Right? Now, as you can imagine, a lot of people like to work in these companies, right? Because they keep the 5 days of pay, by the way.
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Now, sometimes it's two half days, sometimes it's different things for cover, different people have different days and so on and so forth. But the point is the same, is that there are already systems that exist. So one of the ways I'm thinking about a lot of this AI stuff is that idea of it's just a really powerful tool to do the thing that needs doing, but which tool is necessary? So maybe you don't even need AI. Maybe it's just a piece of software that's not actually AI. It's not as in the software, if it's an algorithm, will give you the same answer every time. AI won't,
Yeah.
right? So maybe you need something slightly more dependable. But this goes back to what we were talking about with ICO, with the idea of the orchestrator. It's something Perry Marshall, we're both a fan of, talks about quite a lot, this notion of the chief robot officer, that we are one of our roles now, even as a solopreneur or in a small business that we're leading, is or that we're just given a set of tasks, is that we're chief robot officer. So which parts is a human going to do? You break down the task flow. Which parts are a human going to do? Which parts can various AIs do? And then you're the one, as you said, orchestrating it, putting it all together. Um, what are your thoughts on that? Is that basically where you see everybody nearly managing their time, as everyone will all become sort of chief robot officers to a certain extent?
I think so. So there's so much to this again. Um, let me give you some blurt out some thoughts, and then you can think about this.
Mm,
One thing is that an expert using AI expertly. So what I mean by that is somebody who is a subject matter expert in their own area
mm.
and is also an expert in using AI is suddenly has superpowers because they're able to get so much work done so quickly. They're able to delegate, they're able to build systems, they're able to abstract themselves and become the orchestrator rather than the worker. And
Can we
I
just give
can
a quick example here? Because often people are talking these grand terms. So let's actually just, and that's great, but we're doing an overview. But let's go just deep. So, because a lot of people don't really get how powerful some of these tools are. Can you give an example? Like maybe one of them is, for example, I know you built a custom program which actually beta reads one of your books, which you are updating.
Mhm.
Would that be a useful example?
Okay, yeah. So let me explain that system. And it's fairly, I guess it's fairly simple. Um, so I have a book called An Absolute Beginner's Guide to Using AI, which
Right.
I wrote and published last year as an ebook only.
Okay.
And this year, I decided I wanted to update it because, things change in AI very quickly. So I wanted to release a second edition. And so I took the original and I set it up on my computer as where every chapter is a separate file, and I showed AI how to read it. And then I said, okay, I want you to create five personas for five potential beta readers for this. So five completely different people who might find the book useful. And so if you're writing a book, having feedback from beta readers is incredibly useful and is also very difficult to get because you have to go and find people, get them to read some of your book, give you specific actionable feedback on it, and it takes weeks or possibly months. It's like one of the many reasons why writing and publishing a book take a long time is the kind of the feedback loops. So I created these virtual beta readers, five avatars, and I got them to read every chapter and I had feedback from them on every chapter from five different perspectives. And then I was able to say, okay, I like this feedback. I don't care about that feedback. Let's now update the chapter based on the feedback. And so I was able to process it and triage all the feedback. And I was able to do all of this in, an hour instead of, a 3 month process. So that's
And
that's what I mean
that's
by
a
where you
huge
can
jump.
just
Oh,
speed up these things incredibly. Now I know that they aren't human beta readers, but it's still good enough. And this is the thing, like when is it good enough or when is it not? It's still able to give me feedback that is good enough to move it forward and make the product better.
I hear that. Just to go on a slightly different tack on that, I know with several of your client companies where you've gone in, maybe it's not the first stage, but I was really impressed and quite captivated actually that you very much took the teach a person to fish rather than handing them a fish. So you weren't just showing, oh, here's how to use Gemini or ChatGPT, or here's how to prompt better. You're doing a bit of that, of course, for the basics, right? But what blew me away was you were training them on how to think about seeing problems or difficulties or challenges, how they could apply AI to help solve or improve on those situations or problems. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do is I do co-building sessions.
Mm.
And so what this is where I will actually build a tool to solve a specific problem that is a pain point for my client. So I'll say, okay, let's discuss the problem and see can we build a tool to to fix this or to solve this or automate it. And then I share my screen and I start building it with them. And I get their feedback and we literally build it live. So at the end of, 60 or 90 minutes, they have a tool that they have that actually fixes that problem. Now, I run these as usually 6 month where we meet up once or twice a month. And so we're building out lots and lots of systems. Now, what I found is that those folks who are now on their fourth or fifth or sixth session with me, they're now saying, actually, let me share my screen and let me do the work and you give me feedback on it. So they've learned by watching me and then taking what I've built and experimented and they've gone away and now like one of my clients, Brad, I know that he doesn't mind me mentioning his name. Brad is actually using a coding tool, and he's not a coder, but he's now using a coding tool to build these systems on his desktop and these multi-agent systems. And like he has gone from being like an absolute basic AI user to being an advanced user through just working together and experimenting then. But I think this comes back to a really core thing. You have to have a mindset of curiosity and experimentation. And one of the reasons why that's so important is because it's there's no rule book out there. There's no manual. Now, like people like me are trying to write books about this and show people like the basics. But how AI applies to your specific task, your specific job, your specific role, your specific business, nobody else out there has done that yet. Like probably. So you are, if you're using AI and applying AI to your role, your task, your job, you're probably one of the first people in the world to do that, at least right now. And so like the opportunity is massive, but it also means there's not so many kind of guidance. There's not so much guidance out there. It's more of a sense of, okay, I know it can probably do this. Let's experiment and test and be curious and see if we can do that. Now, what I want to do is I want to raise literacy in AI to the point where people feel confident in doing that and confident in experimenting. So that's kind of where the aspect that I'm coming at it from. I think that, and that goes back to like why I work that way, is because I think that I don't have the knowledge, the domain knowledge, the subject matter knowledge to help create a system, but I can certainly teach them how to think about that and so that they can do it themselves.
And then how to actually use the tools exactly and
Yeah.
to get those results. Yeah, absolutely, as you say. I love that though, that curiosity meeting and doing an experiment. Doing an experiment is often something I repeat to so many clients in so many different arenas because it takes so much of the pressure of getting things right off. It creates that idea of play, of having a hypothesis. Okay, how are we going to use this? And it doesn't have to be right. You can iterate and iterate or totally pivot, drop it, try a totally different experiment. And it means that, as you said, people are actually learning the tool as well as actually, hopefully, sooner or later, getting a result that's really, really useful. So
When
really,
I
really
run
interesting stuff.
training workshops in person,
Hmm.
I give people permission to leave the room, for example. Feel free to walk around, feel free to use your device, use your phone. One of the permissions that I like to give people is the permission to feel overwhelmed. And it's because like for somebody learning about AI, I am overwhelmed all the time. There's just so much. It's drinking from the fire hose, as the Americans say.
Yes.
It's just this kind of deluge of information and updates and changes. And oh, look, there's a new button in ChatGPT that wasn't there yesterday. What does that do? All of that kind of stuff. And that's why I think it's important to to experiment and press the new button when it comes along and see, like, just have permission to be curious about things. And also have permission to feel, okay, this is a bit overwhelming. Let me just focus on getting better at the one thing that I'm working on right now, you know?
Very good, very good. So to kind of turn it back to AI and the psychological edge, my thinking is very much that it's actually making us that bit more almost to use to borrow the word bipolar, that it's pushing us toward each pole, one where we can be much more ruthless with those repetitive tasks that we can use AI for to be incredibly productive amongst many of the other things that you're talking about, as well as all that problem solving, creative thinking. But for me, it's also that frees us up. I know this isn't a new concept, but it's being much clearer on where should I double down on as a human actor, as a human with agency, where would actually serve me? And this is what I never quite understand is, yeah, of course, my clients get it who come to me and go, I want to improve negotiation or be a better communicator because they can see that those gains compound. It's compound interest, being able to communicate better with everyone in every conversation in your life, not just obviously the deals that you're making or those agreements that you're getting. But I'm just interested in your point of view as goes how those two things come together.
Yeah, so okay, like this is a big topic.
Yeah.
Um I think that AI can help us to improve our thinking. I
Hmm.
think it can help us to improve our creativity and our communication, for example. But I think that can also damage all of those things. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
that, like
Interesting one.
that's I think that's the crux of it is like it can be incredibly positive for these things or it can be incredibly negative depending on how you use it, which is why I think it's important that you learn how to use it. I think that this is also, by the way, a compounding skill, just like you mentioned.
Mm.
Having AI literacy and fluency is a compounding skill because then you can use AI more and more. And as it gets better and as new tools come out, you're going to be on top of them quicker, and that's going to give you this compounding impact as well. So that's one aspect. Okay, ask me a specific question. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
Well, we'll loop back to a specific question. I suppose the principle I'm kind of working off is you can outsource a lot of stuff, and that's outsourcing whether it's a human VA, whether that's an AI, right? There's certain things that you don't have to do so much anymore if you choose not to, right?
Hmm.
But as the old phrase goes, you can't outsource your push-ups, right?
Yeah.
If you want to be stronger and healthier doing pull-ups, push-ups, you can't pay someone else to do them for you,
Yeah.
right? So it gets back to that question as to the what are then the things that one can learn or do or get better at, like say push-ups or pull-ups in the gym example, that we can't really outsource. And for me, being a better, more effective, and more rapport building, creative thinking communicator and negotiator is one of those key. I suppose it is a force multiplier.
Hmm.
If you were 5% better than the other person or 10% better than average, those little gains compound over time. Those little, that person is that little bit happier to deal with you again, that little bit more loyal to you than the other person who's attracting them with a better price or whatever. That deal, that agreement you have with that person, that relationship is less transactional and more actual, based on an understanding than than people who are trying to usurp you. And for me, that's kind of the key thing. So just wondering about your opinion on that.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if I have an opinion directly on that because, like, I think that this is. I'll go back to what I said before. Is I do think this is a compounding skill.
Yeah,
I think that humans are going to need to be in the loop, and that humans are going to have certain things like in-person meetings. I think are going to become bigger.
big
In-person
time.
meetups, like group meetings, events, because we're going to get to the point where you can send a virtual avatar to a meeting, and it'll be indistinguishable from a real person. So we'll start to, like, we're already at the point where we can't really trust stuff that we see in terms of video and
Yeah.
audio and photographs.
And that
So
has its own problems that we won't get
that has
into
a
in
lot
this
of
conversation.
problems, an awful
But
lot of problems. But
I,
that's
I
so.
agree.
So does that
Yeah,
answer your question?
it does. Yeah. With the more increase of AI generated content, the less valuable that content is, and the more valuable the in person, the somebody
Yeah.
made an effort to see you in person, shake your hand, say hello, sit down with you,
Hmm.
becomes a whole different level of gravity there. And it's something again, Perry Marshall pointed out that even just speaking on a Zoom call and answering questions on the fly means that you can actually give people insights. That is huge value compared to writing content on your website that says this stuff, but that could have been generated by AI and in 4 seconds, as you say. So one of the things I was thinking about, was that AI is already used in negotiation, like the more canny negotiators I know have done, your ChatGPT deep research where it's finding thousands of sources, hundreds of sources to push back with actual evidence that the price that they're demanding is too high compared to market value or whatever. I know for even several years now, people have used, the transcripts of conversations for word analysis for intent, like how collaborative are they versus, by the choice of words and the certain psychological studies behind that they use. And I don't know if it's there yet, but soon they'll at least highly likely to be examining tone and the
Hmm.
influence of tone, like what's that mean, as to what sort of is it particularly aggressive? Are there moments of need for collaboration or validation or all these sort of things that we can infer from people's tone to give an edge in the negotiation? But what concerns me is actually, at the end of that, there's still a human negotiating with another human across the table, or a team of humans and another team of humans, depending on the scale, which is great. But one of my clients from several years ago had this problem. They were doing deals with teams, and there were hundreds and hundreds of millions. Like I think one of their smallest was like 220 million euro or pounds or whatever. And they had this problem. They were saying that they built 6 months of rapport with the other side, really getting to grips with their needs and why they needed the thing and why they needed to do this and so they could give better solutions to their problems. And they were really like, this is going to be great, blah, blah, blah. Of course, like a lot of these companies, it was then given to a procurement people
Hmm.
or a closer was the other one where a new guy is suddenly parachuted in who doesn't have any of this context, but the reason he was put parachuted in was there's no rapport, so it can be absolutely ruthless. That was the thinking, right? To get this price down by X. And of course, that's where that guy was incentivized by. So his whole thing is, I need to get this number down and that number up or whatever. Careful what you incentivize, right, for unintended consequences. And of course, the other side are like, well, if the price goes down, you're not getting the same thing. We have to remove something. So they went, well, we'll chop out that and put that down by 50%. No, we'll be fine. Walks out like a rock star, right? Gets his massive bonus. Okay. Except guess what? 9 times out of 10, those deals need to be renegotiated within 6 months. Why? Because the thing is no longer fit for purpose because they hacked the original agreement, which was fit for purpose. They hacked it to pieces for a small gain. Now, imagine humans doing that and then the corporation going, oh, well, we need to save money on this. And instead of a human being in that last stage, they get an AI in who is ruthless and has clear rules that they're not going to break. It's the same thing. I need you to get this down by 4% or half a percent or these numbers up by 12% or whatever. It's the same thing. Why? Because humans are still making stupid decisions that aren't based on what they actually want, but what they think they want. So they're incentivizing the wrong thing. So I think that's not AI's fault, though, is it? You see what I mean? It's the human problem then transferred into the robot.
Yeah, and I think that if anybody wants to hear some fun discussion about procurement in particular, listen to David C. Baker and Blair Enns on their Two Bobs podcast. They talk about that a bit,
They do.
and
They're experts, as is yeah. A lot of your favorite guys are very anti-procurement. Procurement people aren't evil. We just need to know how to work with them better. Yes, or not at all, as the case may be. Uh, indeed. I mean, one of the other quick points that I'd make on that is really just that barbell strategy, going extreme. Don't stay in the middle. Be far end of one end of the scale and far in the other. What's can be done by AI, push it to AI. What can be done by humans, better push it to the human end. I mean, years ago, I spoke to a lawyer friend of mine who's doing exceptionally well. And I said to him many years ago when he was kind of starting out, I said, look, the robots are coming. And this is, 15, 20 years ago. I said, the robots are coming. I said, but in by that, I mean, right now, what can you do that's harder and harder, further and further from a robot or an AI replacing you? And it was this idea now that he brings to heart, where he says to a client, okay, if you want, like, you want to be done with this as fast as possible, this is your option. This is your path to go down, and we can do that. If you want to be the guy who's somewhere in the middle, doesn't want to be, leaving too soon, but doesn't want this to drag on for ages, there's another path. And then there's this other path where if you want to absolutely hurt them and you will go to the ends of the earth to do this to get your justice as you see it, then there's this path. Which version of you do you want to be? So it's again getting into that psychology of how you want to turn up and understanding that that's the client. The psychology of the client is key here, the emotional need, because we're all of those people. And
Yeah,
that and
that's really interesting.
the extension of that is why one of the reasons why he's so successful.
Yeah, I love the fact that he's giving them the choice there because I think that some lawyers would not, that they would just take their personality into it and say, this is the way
Exactly.
I operate.
Exactly. On that note, if people want to learn more about you, want to learn more about your services, what you could
Go to
potentially do for them,
humanspark.ai. And I'm also very active on LinkedIn, so
you
I love to
certainly
connect with
are.
you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, reach out to them there. The Human Spark and Alastair McDermott. That's Alastair,
Yeah.
rather than Alist, like I spell it. Yes, reach out to him on LinkedIn. Very active, some great blog posts there, really interesting reading, uh, continually, nearly on a daily basis. I was about to say, I don't know how you're so productive, but I do.
Yep.
But it is valuable content. It is very, very valuable and insightful stuff. All right, any last closing comments or thoughts, Alistair?
Just stay curious and experiment. I think that's the most important thing.
What a brilliant idea. Stay curious and experiment. Couldn't agree more.